it's a perennial problem because it at least looks like it's so at odds with what Buddhism used to be. Now, of course, much of that might be fable, but it looks so strange when you compare it to what tradition says Buddhism was like in the time of the Buddha. You get tons of discourse about this. You get lots of discourse on the pro side that says, of course you can be a productive Buddhist and work your way up the Bodhisattva path while also running a loan shark operation. Well, I'm characterizing unfairly. Running a commercial loan operation. You get a lot of it on the con side, not just from the critics outside of Buddhism, but also from Buddhist monks and nuns who say, you know what, this is just so corrupt. I'm going to ostentatiously just give it all up. I'm moving to the mountains. I'm going to live in a thatched hut. I'm going to wear clothes sewn together out of rags. And I'm going to make myself a conspicuous projection of you, sir. It's a problem that doesn't go away for pretty much the entire 16 or 1700 years of Buddhism's history there. And it's still getting bad for now.
This happens actually similar to our related question. In the Western tradition, there's always this monastic tradition, there's always this conflict between contemplation and action. And it's rooted actually right from the very beginning of the monastic tradition in Western Christian religious tradition, the conflict between contemplation and action. And so what I'm wondering, what I wanted to know is whether in the Buddhist tradition that tension is there in some form from the very beginning, or is it a function of historical circumstances?
It is there, and it gets played out in a couple of ways. See, when Buddhism first showed up in China, it was seen as the reclusive tradition, in contrast to the Confucians, who have always been very socially engagé. And Buddhism was kind of tarred with the brush of being hermetic and withdrawn. And Buddhists in China, one of the great innovations that they seem to have made in the tradition was to really revamp Buddhist cultivation for the Via Activa. That's what Zen is, really. The Zen tradition, which is a great confusing briar patch, is largely about refiguring Buddhism to show that you can be active in the world while still being a kind of inner renunciate or inner hermit.
I'm curious about the different schools or sects that are involved in Taishu within a Zen meditation. So, in terms of this shift toward this more socially engaged Buddhism, do you see that across the board, or is it more a Zen movement or Pure Land, or how does that shape up?
Sects in Chinese Buddhism are a very funny thing. Whereas in Japan or Tibet, people group themselves in very self-conscious sectarian organizations. In China, the sects aren't really, they're not organizations. So if I say, I'm a Pure Land monk, what that really means is, when I go home at night and close the door, I do Pure Land practices instead of Zen practices. But for centuries, there's really only been one ordination lineage in China. Okay, there's a small footnote to that. It doesn't matter too much right now. But the remaining ordination lineage for Chinese monks is the Rinzai Zen, or Yinji Tan lineage. So this is something that's often misunderstood, but it's very difficult to take a group of monks in China and kind of divide them up by sect, the way you could in Tibet, or the way you would with Presbyterians and Lutherans. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't Chan in terms of Chinese Buddhism actually is more a school of philosophy, somewhat supported and cultivated by Wang Yongmin?
Chan is a lot of things.
Yeah, but it's more Chinese philosophy based, right?
People, how to say this? Of all the different kinds of Buddhists, the ones who have had the closest relationship with philosophers like Wang Yongming have consistently been Han Buddhists. It may not be the case that the entire Han pie is subsumed by philosophy, but they're the ones with the most intimate connections to the philosophers, absolutely. Which is one of the jokes that they present themselves as this way of very socially active Buddhism, and they talk about how we don't rely on words and things, but at the same time, they're attending garden parties and writing poems, writing reams of books about how they don't use language. And it seems like they're actually kind of laughing at themselves. Yes, sir?
I had a kind of silly question. I've studied Shaolin Kung Fu before, and I know it originated from the Shaolin monks in China. I don't know if I got my dates wrong or something, but how were they affected by this surge of money, if at all?
I am so glad you asked that question. I should have done the entire lecture about that. It's the best story. Okay. You may have been taught that Shaolin Kung Fu was disseminated across China in the 1500s during one of the great persecutions against Buddhism, when the Shaolin monastery was razed to the ground. I mean, this is the subject of pretty much half the Kung Fu movies out there. One half are about fox spirits eating up scholars like me. The other half are about Shaolin Kung Fu masters like you getting scattered to the four winds during this persecution. So the direct connection is, if you believe the origin legend of Shaolin Kung Fu, it goes like this: economic success, backlash, persecution, and then spread and development of Shaolin Kung Fu all over China into the northern forms that in the movies then fight against the low-standing southern forms. We owe a lot cinematographically to whoever launched that persecution.
Yeah, because I know, like, depending on what area you're in, your Kung Fu is different. If you're in the north, the geography is a lot different. It's, I think, mountainous, so your stances are a lot lower, you've got more balance. Where on the other hand, if you're in the south, you've got more of a flow, and you're actually flying through the air half the time, compared to, more of the harder stuff that you see in the north.
Yeah. This would never have happened without the ruinous economic success of the Shaolin Temple. Well, if there's nothing else, I know that there's a reception waiting for us. Many of us, actually, and anyone who cares to attend, back in Trinity Hall. So I'm not going to keep you from the festivities. I want to say once again, I'm just delighted that folks came to hear about such a dull subject on a Friday afternoon.
Not dull at all.
Yes, it is so interesting, I must say. At first I was thinking, wait, no, I should come. Especially that period of Chinese history, the Wei Jin Wu Tiao and then Tang. That's my weakest period. I mean, the one before Tang, and that was the period you were talking about, Nanbei Tiao. And so I was thinking, I don't want to touch that period again. And yet you made it very, very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Nanbei Tiao, that's my weakest.
Thank you, Jason.